Glad to have you all back with me, Finch, for another roster breakdown as we move into Season 6. And I talked about the Pittsburgh Knights, I think the most exciting roster out of all of them. So this time I'm going to talk about another roster that maybe there's nowhere near as much surprise, but still plenty of excitement. Again, Finch here. You can follow me. Sometimes I stream at these times. I mean, I don't know. I usually don't stream consistently. Who am I lying to? Follow me on Twitter, though. That's the best way to know when I stream since I don't follow my schedule, and I'm a degenerate or whatever you want to call me. I don't know. But let's talk about the rosters, right? Enough about me. Splyce is the one that I want to talk about in this video, and how could I not? You're defending world champions now, the ones who unseated United, though not unseated through direct play, I suppose, right? They really ended up beating Rival and Dignitas and doing so rather handily at that. So I'm excited to talk about them. I guess this feels a little bit different from all the other ones because this roster, since it's virtually the same, it's not so much like, oh, how are they all going to gel together? So I'll try and approach this one differently. What made them great in the first place, and then can that translate into Season 6, I think is probably the best way to go about this. So what made them great in Season 6? Well, a lot of things. The meta certainly helped. Like, how important duo lane pressure was and how easily they were able to get it. Pretty regularly, Cyclone Spin and Aurora were able to just out-pressure whoever was in their lane. It helped that Aurora is very comfortable playing aggressive picks like the Finra in lane. It's kind of his identity, and that can allow them to go steal purple buffs, red buffs, oracles, yada yada yada, and just build up an experience gain. And then Aurora was free to rotate around the map, even affect the mid lane, help out with the jungle as well. That all kind of comes from the fact that Aurora is willing to play aggressive gods in lane and do so very well. Cyclone Spin has also truly come into his own as a hunter. He's one that I've always sort of criticized for his limited god pool, at least back in spring and some in summer. Certainly have to back off that now. He's proven that not only is his god pool expansive, but the ones he does pick are top picks in their own right. So Cyclone Spin's, I think, done a good job kind of changing that narrative and forcing me to sing a different tune. They also just recognize that you can get a bit of a helping hand establishing duo lane pressure. Maybe cheating just a little bit in terms of getting it every time, because Divios is able to come over and help out in the duo lane, especially at HRX, is when we really started seeing this from them. The solo laner starting over in duo lane, it's not even so much about getting a kill or even really bullying them out of lane. It's about being able to clear the way faster, forcing them back, getting that free lane presence, that lane control, and then that opens them up to aforementioned jungle stealing I talked a little bit about already. And then Divios can teleport back to lane really without missing anything. He'd often be there for the blue buff farm anyway to split with Cyno. He would be able to defeat whoever else was in lane with him anyway. It was a free win for Splyce that they kind of recognized first and then forced other people to answer. Rival would go on to answer it quite well, but you kind of see what I mean, right? They were at the forefront of recognizing how important duo was and some of the really creative ways to get that pressure. Another thing that was key for them is that Moswall was able to pretty comfortably play Opwash like all the time. And that's because you can't let Aurora play Finner, you can't let Cyno play Erlong Shin or Naja. It was too much stuff that you had to try and ban away from Splyce to worry about the Opwash. You were much better off letting them have it, knowing that that was going to be there, and trying to counter it in game. The problem was that Moswell was just so good at it that you couldn't. And then, when teams eventually did start banning it, like you saw from Rival in their best of 5, well, Splyce were able to beat it by playing things like Agni and playing them very well. Even when some of the games they lost, I think Moswell was pretty routinely top of the player damage charts, getting off plenty of impact in those team fights, even when he couldn't play the Opwash. So I think Moswell being able to sort of come into his own as a mid laner that demanded attention in picks and bans and in game, and sort of freeing up some room for Cyno and for Aurora to operate in that mid game, especially around the mid lane in particular, was another key reason to their success. And speaking of Cyno, that's another pretty good reason why they were good, is that Cyno's just straight up better than a lot of people in the jungle. And I like this because you kind of started developing his personality, right? He started to get a lot more confident. He started to demand a lot more attention from the enemy team. And so much of what Cyno did required precision, right? Precise target focus, precise decisions on when to engage with the enemy. Cyno would take fights alone early on, deep in the jungle, that maybe not everyone else would take, but they were fights that he was confident in his mechanical skill. He was confident that Aurora might be rotating soon, or confident that he would be able to win the trade if everything went optimally between him and his opponent. He'd be the one that would come out on top, just numbers wise, right? He was confident in a lot of those factors, sometimes together, sometimes individually. And that gave him a lot of plays that other junglers couldn't make, I think. Plus, Erlong was pretty good, and Sino's pretty good at Erlong. That certainly doesn't help. But even like post-nerf, Na Jha was really strong on Sino too, so a lot of good stuff that I think that made him so strong. They also had great target selection just as a team, to give one more reason why I think they were nutty, and they won, and they were right to win, is that they recognized that you could punish supports early on in the game, and that they did it often. It doesn't hurt, that their signature picks are really good at it. I already said the Erlong and the Na Jha. Fenrir as well, all really good at bullying supports. Erlong Shen sticks to you, especially if you're immobile and slow, as Guardians typically are, especially if you have no real way to peel yourself off of them, which Guardians usually don't. Na Jha can take them up out of the fight. Fenrir can bring you right back to the rest of the team and put you out of position. And those are ways that they would very often win team fights, by removing that Guardian early on. And now it's a 5v4 in their favor. And I don't even just mean in the early game. Yes, it's true that you can do it in the early game before they have tank items, but they were doing it mid-game fights, even towards the beginning of the late game around the Fire Giant, picking the support early and eliminating some of that control, some of that peel from the fights on purpose. It was by design. And sometimes it looked weird where Na Jha and the rest of the team are dumping everything into like a Geb or something, or an Ardio, but it was on purpose. They were trying to get those gods out of the way. They knew they were the most vulnerable, and they ended up being right. It was a gamble that ended up working for them. So the question then becomes, I suppose, how well does all that translate into Season 6? Because that's probably the best way to determine if they'll be good in Season 6. I suppose you could also say, well, what if none of that works and they're just the best at determining what's good next year? Valid point. They're probably pretty good at it. But I'll talk a little bit about just what they were good in Season 5, how well that translates. So far, all the signs point to yes. I don't think there's a tremendous shift going to be happening in the meta just based on like design or balance or anything like that. We'll see if maybe player shifts happen, which certainly can. Just players recognize something else is good or a different play style, and that causes a shift. But just based on what we know from Season 6 from like a design and balance standpoint, I don't think so. There's still a premium on duo lane pressure, especially with these Gold Fury changes. There's the Gold Fury that boosts the next minion wave that comes through. That could be huge for giving you one more push. The Gold Fury that's typical, where you get gold. And the Gold Fury that boosts the damage you can do to jungle camps and bosses. I think that might be the most important one because it can stack 3 times, which is huge. I think it's up to 15% extra damage. So it's absurd. You could potentially shred through the Fire Giant, which you're really going to need because the FG should be even stronger this time. I think even Lava Pools are coming back, so you're going to want that buff. And being able to be the team that can push the wave up or have a level or 2 advantage and rotate over to that buff and over to the Gold Fury, control the pit, and steal it is really, really going to be important, and Splyce already do that really, really well. Another thing, this solo lane change, which I like, this totem, if that puts a premium on having lane control in solo, I don't know if there's anyone I'd rather have than Divios. I'm calling it a push between him and Deathwalker 1A and 1B, right? I assume that they'll be beating all other comers, except maybe Benji, but I would probably take those two right now as the premiers. They were the ones in the finals, after all, as the premier solo laners. So if having that extra presence there ends up mattering, whether it's for, that MP5, the movement speed that's there now, or if it even gets buffed down the line, it's even stronger, then you want the guy that can have it almost every game, and I think Divios gives that to Splyce. I mean, it's just crazy. It really does look like this team could be just as strong next year as they were now. Some of their picks, I think, have a chance to be a little bit weaker. Poash probably not going to be as good. We'll have to see if Moswall can adjust. I think he can, but, we just got to see it put into action, obviously. And then if Sino can do as well, too, because Sino's performing at such a high level, they're going to consistently need that from him again. But I'm so glad the boys are sticking together. I don't know why they wouldn't, obviously, as the world champions. Of course, they're bringing Kabam with them as well. Sorry, I don't want to make this sound like a footnote there at the end. Kabam was huge for this team. We interviewed them a bunch of times, and they're always talking about how he was good in terms of helping manage those personalities, giving the outside view on picks and bans, and in-game stuff. Not just one or the other, but certainly both for that team. He was the one that came up with the idea to have them all come together in summer, and that's when they really started to gel, it felt like. So Sino was sort of the genesis of that as well. So there's a lot there that you may not be able to see on a stat sheet, pardon the cliche, but Kabam clearly important to this team, and they respect his opinion as well. So all 6 of them still together. Splyce will absolutely be a force to be reckoned with in Season 6. Hard not to pick them as the top 2 or 3.